everybody, this is Tracy here with another edition of A View from Tracy's Point, and we are here to talk about the Amber Guyger murder trial. And for those who are not familiar, Amber Guyger is a Dallas police officer who entered the wrong apartment in her apartment complex, and she shot and killed a young man by the name of Botham John. And so she's on trial for his murder. She's facing a murder one and manslaughter charge in this case, so the jury can go either way. And I did a video, a recap video of the testimony for the first 4 days. You guys can go back and check that out, and I'll also drop the link above. And I did a part 2, which was the wrap up of the testimony in the case, but I struggled. So I had part of the video already laid out because I cut the first video in half because it was an hour and a half long. And then I added some more commentary after going back and watching the video and going, oh, I messed that up or I missed that. And so I created the second video, but the program that I use is having technical difficulties. And so I have spent the past 24 hours trying to get that video to save so that I can load it, and I have been unsuccessful, which means that I'm going to have to go back and start from scratch and getting that video recreated. And I'll go ahead and post it. It'll probably be another day or maybe later today. I'll go ahead and just post that video, whereas I'm doing this premiere on this one. And so this video is about the closing arguments. So all of the testimony ended on Saturday, and in the first video that I did, I said, oh, they're going to have more testimony on Saturday. We can expect the closing arguments and for the case to go to the jury. But court ended abruptly on Saturday morning. They did like a hearing on an expert named Craig Miller, but it was outside of the jury. The jury wasn't in the room. That lasted about an hour, and then the judge made a decision on Craig Miller's testimony. And then there was another guy, a Texas Ranger by the name of David Armstrong, who she said couldn't testify for the prosecution, or his testimony was very limited for the prosecution, but then the defense wanted to call him as a witness also, and once again very limited on what he could talk about. David Armstrong took the stand on Saturday morning, and he was up there for a total of 4 minutes, and he was asked 4 questions, and they were basically, yes, no questions, because it only lasted for a couple of minutes. Craig Miller was still on the premises waiting to testify, but then the decision was made that either the defense didn't want him to testify, or the judge ruled and changed her mind, saying that he couldn't testify. And so one of the things that I pointed out in the second video that I hope to get up to you guys is that my thinking was that the judge is trying to eliminate any opportunities for the defense to have an appeal in the event that Amber Guyger is found guilty. And so she was pretty unsure. You could tell that she was kind of like second guessing herself as she was laying out what they could and could not ask. And so my thought process was that somebody must have texted her or sent her an email regarding the decision that she made, because she abruptly ended court or paused court, after David Armstrong spoke. And then she might have been thinking, okay, I put so many limitations that they couldn't even ask him any questions, and so was it even beneficial to have him up there? And so she did leave out of the courtroom. We don't know if she went to research something, if she went to talk to somebody, what was going on in that time period that she was gone. But then she returned and said that court was going to be adjourned, and it would pick back up today. And then today we went straight into writing out the rules, because they have a discussion between the prosecution and the defense and the judge about how the wording, well, they get to object to the wording on the instructions that are going to be given to the jurors. So they had this conversation going on where they said, we think this should be stricken from the closing. This should be stricken from the instructions that are going to the jury. This doesn't apply. This applies. And so they, hatched that out. That took about 2 or 3 hours to do. And then they came back in, brought the jury back in, and went into the closing arguments between the prosecution and the defense. Each one had an hour or a little over an hour. And basically, the prosecution brought their attorney up, who did the bulk of the closing arguments. And then the defense came up, and Toby Shook, who is the lead defense attorney for Amber Guyger, he did the bulk of the defense's closing argument. And then he had another guy with him who kind of like wrapped it up and I guess brought it back home for the defense. And then the lead prosecutor on the case then came back with the rebuttal to what the defense was saying, and then the court went into adjournment, and then the judge went in and spoke with the jurors, I guess to give them their instructions or to ask them if they wanted to go to lunch. They chose to go to lunch, and so when they return from lunch, she's going to give them the instructions on reviewing evidence, if they need anything, contact the bailiff, all the rules of while they are, going over the case and coming back with a decision. And then once all of that is done, then the clock will start on deliberations with the jury. And it seemed kind of cut and dry to me, and that it's probably not going to take them long to deliberate. But then again, if there are some people who are determined that Amber Guyger is innocent, and then there are other people that are dug in saying that she's guilty, then they go through this process of trying to pull those people to their side, and that can take hours. And oftentimes when the jury is locked, they'll come to the judge, and then the judge will kind of encourage them, go back, try again. Some judges will do that once. Some judges do it 3, 4, 5 times. Like, make sure that there is no way that you can come to a unanimous decision. And a lot of that is based on how many people are on each side. So if it's 11 to 1, then the judge is going to say, work hard, work hard, work hard to convince that person to come over to your side. If it's 8 to 4, they may not, say, well, then they may say, well, that's too much of a burden to try and convince that person, but just go back and try to get those people to change their minds, argue about it a little while longer, present more evidence from the trial to try and get that person to see things, or those people to see things your way. But I think if it's split down the line, or it's tilting to 10 people saying that the person is innocent and 2 people saying no, they're guilty, then it becomes a case where they will likely consider doing a mistrial. So the length of deliberations is really going to hinge upon how many people think she's guilty and how many people think she's innocent, and whether or not the numbers are low enough or high enough that they can convince the holdouts to come over to their side either way, as far as being innocent or being guilty. So let's just go in. Like I said, it was closing arguments for the prosecution and the defense. Took about 2 hours, or a little over 2 hours, and I'm just going to go over quickly some of the things that they said and my thoughts. And hopefully this video won't take 2 hours. So let's go ahead and jump into this. And so the positions that they're taking is the prosecution is saying that Amber Guyger says she went to the wrong apartment and accidentally shot Botham John, that it was an honest mistake, that she should be found innocent because it was a mistake, a reasonable mistake that the average person would make. And we know that that is not the case, because the average person, not even taking into consideration that she's a police officer, but the average person would walk up to their door, realize there's somebody inside, would call the police. They would not go barging into the house or the apartment trying to be a superhero. They would try to get help. And the only I think the only way somebody would actually, a reasonable person, average person, would enter the apartment is if they knew that their loved one was in the apartment and that their life might be in danger. But other than that, the average person, knowing somebody was inside, would not have gone inside. And they brought up, the different witnesses who said, so like the prosecution was like, well, you had this witness say that they were in their home and somebody entered the home, but they didn't feel threatened. They just told the person, get out of my house, or you're in the wrong house. And then the was trying to use those testimonies of people that said they went to the wrong floor, they went to the wrong door, they tried to stick their key in, is showing that Amber Guyger was innocent, that she made an innocent mistake. But what the prosecution and the defense failed to hit on when they were talking to the jury is that none of those people killed anybody. None of those people, felt so threatened to the point where they felt like they had to use deadly force. And that in the cases where the people, were in their apartment and these witnesses entered the apartment, that those people didn't act erratically. They didn't scream, yell, help, or anything. They just told the person, you're in the wrong apartment, and the person said, oh, I'm sorry, and they turned around and they left. And I didn't feel that they hit on that enough in the closing arguments. Then they talked about the emotional aspect of deliberating, and so they hit on the fact that just because Amber Guyger is a police officer and you decide to find her guilty, it doesn't mean that you hate the police. Don't internalize the fact that, oh, I'm going to find a police officer guilty, or I have to find this person innocent because she is a police officer. That, don't let emotion fall into it. They talk about the racial aspect, with Amber Guyger being white, Botham John being black. Don't say, oh, well, this was just a white woman that hated black people. And if you're a black person dealing with police brutality and what's going on in society, don't feel obligated that you have to find her guilty, and don't feel like you're going to be judged if you find her guilty, and don't feel like you have the pressure of the community to find her guilty. Weigh the evidence, use common sense, and come to the right verdict. And they did reinforce the fact that Botham John was sitting on his sofa. He was getting ready to watch the Eagles and the Falcons football game. He had a bowl of ice cream with some cookies in it. He had a blanket, some pillows on the sofa. He had his laptop was open up to a specific website. He was comfortable. He was settling in. He had just gotten home. He was settling in, to a night of watching football. They talked about earbuds, that he might have had earbuds in, which I didn't understand if he was watching football, or maybe it was, it came up in the case about the noise complaints. So maybe he was listening to the game through the earbuds, or maybe he was playing a game on the laptop and was listening, because I know a lot of times I was watching the trial, on my laptop, and then I was watching tennis on the television, and then I might have had something up on my tablet that I was researching. So you can do multiple things at one time. They also reiterated the whole trajectory of the bullet, entering the heart and then traveling diagonally downward. Of course, the prosecution said that he was sitting on the sofa. He may have been trying to raise himself up when she opened the door. The defense is contending that he was standing already, that he started coming towards her. The prosecution made a good point because they were saying that the defense was saying that the angle of the bullet is consistent with the fact that he realized she had a gun and he ducked down. And then the prosecution was saying, well, if he had ducked down, she wouldn't have hit him directly in the heart, which was where she was targeting, where she's trained to target when she's getting ready to hit, to shoot somebody that is considered to be a threat. Police officers shoot to kill. And so if he was actually ducking down, she most likely would have shot the counter instead of shooting him because he was going down, or she would have shot him in the face or something like that. And so they, talked about the trajectory and where he was sitting. They made the point of pointing out the fact that Amber Guyger said when she left her apartment that morning, she turned off everything. So there was no TV on, there was no lights on, no computer, nothing. She turned everything off before she left her apartment. And when she went into Botham John's apartment, he had the laptop on, the computer screen, was lit up, the television was on because he was watching the football game. And the fact that when she opened the door, that the light from the hallway would have come in and illuminated the room. And so they also pointed out that in order for her to have known he was standing at the back wall, that he was walking towards her, or if he was actually sitting on the sofa and getting ready to get up, that there was no way she shot him in 1 second, as the defense is trying to say that she only had 1 second to react. They're saying that she had to scan that room because she knew before she opened the door that somebody was inside. She testified to that. And once she opened the door, she had like the book bag, the bulletproof vest, the lunchbox, all of that was on her left arm, and she used that to open the door. So she used the key to unlock the door, or was trying to unlock the door, but she should have gotten a red light saying, dummy, this is not your door. But she said she didn't notice the red light. But she put the key in. She says the door started to open. She used the left hand to finish opening the door so she could come in. And all of this had to have taken more than a second or two. Then she had to take the gun out of the holster. And they're saying that it takes like 1.8 seconds to raise your arm into the shooting position, which I can agree. But keep in mind, she had to take the gun out of the holster. She had to find Botham John in the room. And then she had to point the gun at the subject, that she was intending to shoot. By her own admission, she went in there to assess the situation and to take out the perpetrator. The prosecution had a very, very strong closing argument and rebuttal. The defense tried to, clear up some things. They tried to say that, certain things weren't important, that the prosecution, was bringing in about the sexting with the partner, about the deleted text messages, because they deleted messages. The length of the phone call, whereas prior their phone calls only lasted a couple of minutes, but on this particular day the phone call lasted like 13 minutes. And they were just saying that the prosecution was focusing on all of this stuff that had nothing to do with her state of mind at the moment that she entered the apartment. So on the rebuttal, then the prosecution came back and was like, well, yeah, you're right. None of that stuff really does matter. What does matter is that she stood at that door. You're sitting there saying self-defense, but she had enough time to remain in a safe spot. So she was safe on the outside of that door. And even if she overlooked the bright red mat, even if she passed by all these doors and didn't notice that the numbers all began with 1-4 and not 1-3, the fact that she overlooked all these differences between her floor and his floor. The fact that she pulled into the garage and didn't realize she was on the top level and it was an open air space, whereas on the third floor where she normally parked, there were walls. You couldn't see outside. You couldn't see the city skyline. You couldn't see the buildings or anything. Even if she overlooked all of that, when she got to the door, heard somebody shuffling around, according to her, she had time to retreat, to call for backup, to reassess the situation, to knock on the door and say, you know, who's in there. She had time to do all of that, but instead she went in, she sought out a suspect, and then she opened fire on that person. So I think that they really brought that home. The prosecutor also said that there were 5 signs that the apartment was not hers, and they said that, I know in the previous video, I left out the part about Botham John he had a wisdom tooth pull, and I think it was something about the pain in the wisdom tooth or something was going on. So he was taking medication for that. And then also he was prescribed marijuana, I think for nerves or something. Don't quote me on that, but he did smoke marijuana for some condition. And so when she walked into the apartment, they said it smelled like marijuana. Like somebody in that apartment smokes marijuana. And remember, the other neighbor said that him and Botham had that in common, that they both smoked marijuana. And so they say even 2 days later, when they were coming back to investigate, you could still smell the marijuana. Then you have the fact that the TV was on, and she claimed that the TV in her apartment when she left was turned off. Then you have the differences in the furniture. The fact that there's this bright red rug sitting at the door, that she didn't notice the rug. She didn't notice the fact that she was walking on concrete, so the hallway is concrete, and then you went from concrete to a rug, that she didn't notice that. The fact that the door that she closed her door and made sure her door was locked that morning, but then when she came back to his door that evening, then the door was ajar, that she really wasn't taking in all of this stuff. And as a 5-year veteran of the police force, they are trained to be observant. They are trained to be aware of their surroundings. And for her to have gotten out of that, to have parked on the wrong floor and walked down this hallway, got to this apartment, and was not aware of anything that was around her was really unbelievable. Prosecution contended that she should have known that she was in the wrong apartment. And so the main premise of the prosecution's case is that she was not thinking like a reasonable person, which we've already talked about, because a reasonable person wouldn't have went into that apartment. Then they talk about the fact how she said in her own words, she heard the shuffling. She was going to go in hell or high water to, confront the perpetrator, and it was her intention to shoot to kill. So they talk about the fact that she went into the apartment commando style, like she was, on 10. Okay, she was ready to take somebody out, ready to be the hero. And there was a doctrine that they talked about in the conversation with the judge, the hearing outside of the jury, where it was called the Castle Doctrine. And I believe the Castle Doctrine is basically you have the right to protect your home. And so they said that the only difference is that the defense is trying to use the Castle Doctrine to say that Amber Guyger was justified in shooting Botham John because it was her domain and she had a right, to protect her domain. But the only problem was it wasn't her domain. It was Botham John's domain, and therefore the only one that can claim the rights of the Castle Doctrine is Botham John, not the person that killed him. Then they drilled in the fact that it was not a mistake, her killing Botham John, that she just simply did not think that night. Like she was just making bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. And then they went on to say that the case is about accountability for unreasonable decisions, and that basically you can't set a precedence that it's okay to make bad decisions, to think unreasonably, go into somebody's home and kill them, and then just be able to say, oops, I made a mistake. And that if they come back with an innocent verdict, then basically they're telling people, telling the public, it's okay to go into somebody's home, kill them, and then say, oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. And then they reinforce that Botham Jean is dead because of Amber Guyger's unreasonable choices, and that if you have reasonable alternatives, so this is where they were talking about self-defense and how it wasn't self-defense because she created the situation that she was in. And so they said because there were other alternatives, she could have not entered the apartment, she could have called the police, she could have called for backup. They talk about the fact that she had her radio on her, but instead she used her cell phone to call the police, whereas it would have been, or to call 911, whereas it would have been quicker if she had used the radio. And the defense came back and said that the first responders arrived 2 minutes after the call. So the fact that she used the cell phone and didn't use the radio really didn't make much of a difference in saving Botham's life. And the fact that she shot him in the heart, he was going to die anyway. It was a lethal shot that she took, and so it didn't matter if he died instantly or he died at the hospital. He was not going to survive that wound. And then the prosecution argued that deadly force was not immediately necessary, that when she was standing at that door, she did not have to choose to enter and use lethal force. She could have chose to walk away. And that once she opened the door, she became the aggressor. Because she became the aggressor and made the decision to walk in, that quote, Botham Jean was dead before the door ever opened, because she had already made up in her mind she was going to kill him. And then the prosecution also argued that she did not yell loudly, let me see your hands or show me your hands, that if she did say it, it wasn't as loud as she's claiming it was, because the other people would have heard her. And even she testified that she opened the door. She was standing on the silver, I can't think of what they call it, but you know, the little trike that's in front, that's underneath the door that blocks, like, you know, the gap between the door and the floor. And she was standing on that when she opened the door and, you know, shot at him, according to her. So because all the neighbors testified that you can hear very clearly what's happening in the hallway, they would have heard her if she had yelled, let me see your hands or show me your hands. And they said that if there had been one witness that actually said that they interviewed 300 people that were living in the apartment complex, and that if at least one of those people had said that they heard her yell any kind of command to him, that the defense would have put those people on. And then when the defense was giving their statement, they pointed out the fact that the prosecution had witnesses that kind of bolstered Amber Guyger's statements. And so one of those people was this guy named Joshua Brown, and he actually broke down on the stand. And if I can get that second video up, you'll get to see his part of his testimony. But he basically said that he could hear two distinct voices that were talking over each other. And so the defense is saying that proves that she said, you know, let me see your hands, and that Botham Jean was yelling, wait a minute, or no, what are you doing, or something like that. But he says that the two voices were interacting at the same time, and he couldn't make out what they were saying, but he just knew that there were two distinct voices. And so on the defense side, they tried to drill in that the law of self-defense is central to this case, and that the decision to use deadly force can be made in a second. And that, so they wavered back and forth, like at some points they wanted to, you know, use her police training and the fact that she was a police officer to defend her. And then in other times they wanted to say, but she wasn't acting as a police, she was acting as a regular citizen in that moment when she made this decision. And the prosecution was saying you can't have it both ways. It went on to say that the law, the way that the law is written, that it recognizes mistakes can be made, and that you don't have to find a person guilty in order to say that they made a mistake. And they told the jury, you know, that they're not telling them not to have sympathy for Botham John and the fact that he's dead, but they have to apply the letter of the law in making their decision. And they talked about the fact that the prosecution keeps harboring on the fact that she left the apartment. She left him there to die, but they say that the reason she left the apartment was because she wanted to go get help for Botham John and make sure that the arriving responders knew exactly where they were at. And the defense, was very clear that they didn't think that the prosecution had overcome the burden of a mistake of fact, and that the law does allow for people to make mistakes, and the prosecution simply hasn't overcome that burden of saying that this was more than a simple mistake that somebody had made. And then they harped on the fact, once again, that dozens of people had said that they had gone to the wrong floor of the apartment complex. And I thought it was interesting because when I was listening to the testimony, they were saying in percentages, like, 15% of the people said that they had parked on the wrong floor unintentionally, and that 23% of that 15% said that they had also gone so far as to put their key in the wrong door. But then when the defense was talking during the closing argument, they were actually giving actual numbers, like 80 people said, this amount of people said, and those numbers kind of wasn't adding up to the 300 people that they said was surveyed. So I don't know if there were like two different people that gave testimony on the results of the survey that was done, or if they were just hyping up the numbers of the people that said that they had made this similar mistake. But one thing is undoubtedly clear is that nobody made the mistake of pulling out a gun and killing somebody in their own apartment because they made a mistake. And they talk about, the fact that the building was very confusing and that the doors weren't locking properly, numbers weren't clear, people had to really, really look for the numbers. So they harped on that a lot during their closing statements. And then they claimed that it all happened in 1 second, which we know it had to be more than 1 second because she stood at the door, she heard the shuffling, she had to open the door, she had to find him in the room, she had to fire the gun, and all of that took more than 1 second. Now, she may have only taken 1 second to decide that she wasn't going to be a reasonable person and walk away and call for help. Now, that decision might have taken 1 second, but the act of actually getting in the apartment and killing him took more than 1 second. And then they, continued to say that the physical evidence shows that Amber Guyger is telling the truth. And, I don't know how they come to that conclusion. I guess it's her truth versus the real truth. But anyway, that's what they contend. They talked about the fact that Botham John didn't know that his door had been left ajar, so they do agree with that. And they said that, he unfortunately heard somebody coming into the apartment. He got up to see what was going on, and that decision cost him his life and put Amber Guyger's life in danger, and she had to make this decision to shoot him in an act of self-defense. And the defense also agreed that there are no winners in this case. Like, regardless if it's a guilty verdict or an innocent verdict or not guilty verdict, there really are no winners, and that, both of their lives effectively have been destroyed. Like, his life has ended. Amber Guyger, even if she's found not guilty, has to live with this decision that she killed an innocent man. And unless she really is this heartless person that she has demonstrated herself to be, it should impact her life going forward, and hopefully no other police department will give her a job. And she said that this was a dream of hers. This was something she always wanted to do. She went to school for. And so hopefully, if she is found not guilty, her punishment will be that she's never ever allowed to work in law enforcement again. As I talked about before, they were saying that the prosecution kept bringing up the sexting and making a lot of speculation about what was going on in Amber's mind at the time, and they don't think that any of that has anything to do with it. But as the prosecution rebutted. You're right, it doesn't have anything to do with it. What does matter is the fact that when she was on the other side of that door, on the safe side of the door, she had a decision to make, and she made the wrong decision by going into the apartment. They, talked about that she acted and was more focused on what she perceived to be an intruder, and that's how she entered the apartment, and that it was self-defense. And I think that the prosecution did a great job in rebutting the whole self-defense. And then the lead prosecutor actually said that there were several things that they had to look at to determine whether or not she acted in self-defense. And then they pointed out two of them, which was the fact that she entered the apartment and put herself in harm's way, and that she had already made the decision to kill him before she entered the apartment. So there was no defense for her actions, and there was no self-defense. And then the defense also put up these reasonable doubt things, and so they said that it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt in order to find somebody guilty. But they did this scale, and so it starts with guilt is highly likely, guilt is likely, probably guilty, possibly guilty, perhaps, and then it goes on the end where you have to find her definitely not guilty. It was may not be guilty, possibly not guilty, unlikely guilty, probably not guilty, less than likely guilty, highly unlikely that she's guilty, and therefore she's proven to be not guilty. And so they were basically saying that there is no middle ground. You either have to say she's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, or she's not guilty. That it was just no way she could be guilty in this case. And you can't be going on emotions, that you have to make a solid decision. And then we already know it has to be unanimous. And so that's it, guys. Let me know what you think. Do you believe she's going to be found guilty or not guilty? Do you think that the state put on a good case? Do you think the defense put on a good case? Do you think that if she's found not guilty, that there was some concern about, people being upset and taking to the streets to express their frustration and being upset? Or do you think that the city is going to accept whatever verdict it is and remain calm? Let me know what you think. Leave your comments below, rate the video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And I shall talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.